Alright, so you want to know how the Romans lived happy, huh? You've probably heard of a couple of these philosophers before, and maybe some of the history of Rome, but let's quickly go over it. So, my name's Amon. I help people with mental and physical health reframes to achieve their purpose, but whatever your purpose is, I know that ancient Roman philosophy might help you actually get towards your goal, so let's just go over it. So Rome was a city between Tuscany and Greece. It was along the trade path there, and it offered a unique opportunity for people to actually become citizens of Rome. So migrants and refugees, people who actually, like anyone who stumbles across Rome, they can become a citizen. And it made Rome the largest metropolitan city in the ancient world. And metropolitan just means mother and city combined in Latin, so it makes sense because people can make Rome their mother city. And people who were originally in Rome were thought to have been refugees or people who fled from the Middle East after the Trojan War, that myth of the Trojan horse that you might have heard of. There were 7 kings, but then eventually there was a scandal, and people thought that there was way too much power in the hands of one man. So from the year 509 BC onwards, there were 2 councils who served instead of 1 king, and there were 300 fathers below the council who actually served to help make decisions. Now in ancient Rome, there were a lot of assassinations, suicides, slaves, civil wars, and things like that. So how did they actually stay happy? Assuming that they stayed happy at all. Well, I believe that it was probably philosophy that helped them. There were many philosophers, all of which who contributed to the understanding of life in some sort of way. And if we understand life, we can understand mental health and how humans behave. If we understand mental health and how humans behave, we can figure out a way to actually make our mental health better and get towards the goals faster. So the main one that you probably all know about is Marcus Aurelius. He's probably the most well-known, but he didn't consider himself a philosopher. He considers himself like a man who was just trying to implement everything that he knew in life to be true and everything that he knew to be good. He was the last good emperor of Rome. He just focused on living correctly. So he knew what to do and what was right to do, but his trouble was he had trouble on executing how to do it and to actually do it in his daily life. So that was his focus, to try to find a way to adapt philosophy into his needs to actually implement everything that he knows to be true. And this was basically Stoicism, and he focused a lot about self-virtues, which is epithets. I'll cover that later, but you're probably in pain because of something that you want to do but aren't doing, or something that you are doing but need to stop. So an example would be junk food. You know that is not good for you, right? You want to stop doing it, but you can't. Another example is working out. Some people know that they want to do it, but they don't like it for some reason. So the trouble there is to actually start working out. So Marcus Aurelius' meditations is really just about implementing the advice and also understanding what he knew to be true. So if you're struggling at all with something, it might be just that you know that's like what to actually do, but you don't know how to actually implement that and how to get over that first obstacle to actually start doing whatever you want to do. I would probably say to read Meditations, the Gregory Hayes translation, so then you don't have to read any old English for no good reason. The next one, he's a little bit less well known. His name is Cicero. He was known for his political career. He was a philosopher who introduced Greek schools of thought and schools of philosophy into Rome, and he also introduced vocabulary into Latin, which didn't exist previously, and that probably gave a good base for philosophers after him to sort of think and have concepts already there that are predefined, so they don't have to figure out a way to explain that. And his philosophy was a mix of academic skepticism and Stoicism. He kept the virtues of Stoicism, but the doubt of skepticism. So a quick definition, Stoicism. So the basic ideology of this is basically just understanding the true nature of things, understanding what's in and out of our control, as well as abiding by the virtues of Stoicism or our self-virtues like epithets. So Stoic virtues would be something like courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice. And self-virtues would be something like being a good father, a good brother, a good sister, a good mother, being disciplined, always focused, being minimalistic, just things like that. And skepticism is basically just the idea that any belief can be proved false. It's critical of other philosophies, saying that they're either irrelevant to what humans actually need in daily life or completely false. And they say that in order to avoid being wrong, just don't believe anything at all. This is similar to what Naval Ravikant said in the book The Almanac of Naval. And he basically says that he believes nothing in the past because it has no bearing on what he does now and what he should do in the future. But he just doesn't simply believe nothing, he only believes things that he can reason from the ground up. Now if we take the doubt from skepticism and the virtues from Stoicism, we end up with something like the following. So we reason from the ground up, we don't believe anything that's given to us, so our beliefs are based on logic. We understand what's in and out of our control, and that allows us to not be upset by things that are outside of our control. So we have our own epithets, which means that we can make decisions easier. We can just basically say, does this decision I'm about to make align with my epithets or not? And then we also understand the true nature of things, like things are fragile, people can die, things can break, everything is temporary, and also that people are people. So they can be mad, angry, they can also be courageous, cooperative. This ends up being a pretty decent philosophy to take into the modern world. But then we also have other philosophers on the list that we'll just go over. So the next one is Plotinus, and his philosophy was Neoplatonism. So he had ideas like the One, which is similar to like a god figure, where if you do right on this planet, then you go return back to the One, similar to heaven. And if you don't do anything right in this life, then you basically are reincarnated as a human or an animal. So I guess it's kind of like starts the idea of heaven and hell. But then if we take the ideas of Cicero with skepticism, then we can try to reason from the ground up. And since I can't remember anything from my previous life, that means I cannot verify that I did something wrong in the previous life to end up here right now. But religiously, this belief can work, so it depends on who you are. So Seneca, he was an advisor to Nero, the emperor, and Nero was one of the worst emperors, doing like a lot of atrocities, but that's going to be way too much to cover. But Nero told Seneca to kill himself after Nero thought that Seneca was in a plot to assassinate Nero. But in his time of life, he was a Stoic. He had ideas like there's no good or bad in the world except for virtues and vices. He says that the mind is rational, but there's things that can make us irrational. So like emotion can cloud our judgment, and that can create an irrational outcome or decision. He says life is not short, but we waste our time. He has philosophical works like Letters from a Stoic and On the Shortness of Life. And the points of understanding what's good and bad in life are more defined by him clearly with his works, and those are definitely ways to be happier. And if we understand that life isn't short, but we just waste our time on things that don't matter, then we can become happier by spending time on things that do matter and that could bring us happiness, rather than things that don't bring us happiness that we can't control. Okay, the next one, Lucretius. So we don't really know too much about him. There's only like records from like a Christian writer named Jerome about him and his life, so we can't really say much about him. So his only philosophical work that we know about is On the Nature of Things. And it just basically explains Epicurean philosophy. It covers atomism, the nature of the mind, soul, sensation, and thought. And this poem explains a lot of natural phenomena in the world. Also about like how the universe operates. And he was a naturalist who believed in God, but he believed that God did not do anything to actually create the world or the universe. These are more abstract topics that don't really apply to our everyday life, so we can't really extrapolate anything about how to be happy with something like this. But with the childlike curiosity of trying to understand what the meaning of life is, what the things around us are, what their purpose is, what they actually do, then it invokes that childlike curiosity, and that can definitely make us a little bit happier because we don't really use that childlike curiosity much in the modern world. Okay, second last one. The next one is going to be pretty good, but this guy is Boethius or Boethus. He was a Neoplatonist as well. His work was On the Consolation of Philosophy. He wrote this while he was imprisoned, and it's basically like a dialogue between him and philosophy, but philosophy is a woman. And it explains the nature of fate, good and evil, the divine source of wisdom, and also chance. Understanding fate and good and evil, it helps us understand the world a little bit better and how humans actually work. And in a way, it just takes off the tinted sunglasses to help us see the real world a little bit better. So if we understand fate, we understand that there's things outside of our control that happen to us. So we can't really do much about it. And that links it to Stoicism basically. If we understand good and evil, we understand that there must be evil in order to have good, and there must be good in order to have evil. We also know that we don't control what others do, so that also links it to Stoicism. And if we understand those two examples, then we have more proof and more experiences to actually understand the concepts that Stoicism tries to teach us, because Stoicism, it teaches you a concept, but you kind of have to find out the example so that you can understand it yourself. But with these philosophers, they give us examples so that we can understand whatever philosophy we follow a little bit better. Okay, one of the most well-known on this list, apart from Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, is Epictetus. He was born a slave, but was eventually freed. He studied under Musonius Rufus, which I believe he also taught Marcus Aurelius. He began to give lectures, but his writings aren't really accessible, so he had a student named Arrian, and his writings are what we know of are Epictetus. So his works were Discourses, which is basically all of his lecture notes from Epictetus, and also Enchiridion, which is all of Epictetus's knowledge and wisdom from Discourses, but distilled into very bite-sized pieces of information and kind of like a handbook for life. And he believed that the main task in life was to differentiate between what's in our control and out of our control. He called it the chief task in life. And basically, if we do that, then we don't really spend time on things that we can't change. It's obvious how this can actually make us a little bit happier. So we just don't waste time on things trying trying to change things that we can't actually change. And I think the main takeaway from this video and from these philosophers is just like be stoic or follow whatever, you know, philosophy that you follow, but try to understand the most of the world that you can and try to find examples to solidify these concepts that you learned about into real life. Another thing that I would probably recommend is read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, or if you don't want to read, then you can go to the Daily Stoic YouTube channel, and that is a very good way to start about it. Now, if you like this format, I've been trying something different with this. I feel like you're probably going to love my meditation guide. It'll help you a lot with mental health, along with this and everything else that you could be doing on my channel. It acts as an amplifier for whatever improvement to mental health that you're going to do. So it'll be linked in the description probably, and somewhere on screen here. You can just go click on that video, I'll see you there, and remember, this is what hard feels like.